and welcome into this video. And today I want to show you this very interesting Rook Endgame that happened in the European Youth Chess Championship. So him playing against the FIDE Master, and we got this position where I have to defend this Rook Endgame. So why is white better? Because of this queenside majority, 3 versus 2. I mean, I have this 4 on 3 on the king side. But the thing is, first of all, a 3 on 2 is usually better than a 4 on 3. And I have this double pawns, and my rook is quite passive. This king is also getting quite fast into the action. But okay, he played king b2, preparing some c3 or c4 or a3 to get a 2 and 1, which is even better. And he played e5, which is not a great move, but it doesn't really matter for us. He played f5, and he could have played rook e3. Maybe then I have to go rook b5. It would have been better to activate my king first. So he played f5, and here I activated my king. The question is to f8 or to g7. So on f8 it can go to e7. Here it can go like this. So in the game I play king f8, which is not a terrible move, but it would have been better to play king g7 and activate the king like this, because it's just way more active, and in Rook Endgame's activity is very important. But anyway, I played king f8 and played a3. And the thing is, after this trade which happened in the game, he also gets a passed pawn like this. Now I played c4, just limiting my rook, and I played rook b7, so I didn't really know what to do. For example, if I go a5, then it's king a3, maybe rook d5, and because now a4 is a threat, so white just prevents this and then goes rook d5, and I'm just completely losing. This king can't go there, everything is controlled, so it would have been better to go like this. So I played rook b7 with the idea to go rook d7. Maybe rook b8 is also interesting, to go activate the rook like this. Would have been maybe a bit better. But okay, played rook b7. I played king c3, and now I offered this rook trade, which he didn't accept. The thing is, now this pawn and game is equal. White can never try to bring the king like this, for example, because then this pawn is just going to queen. And one thing I had to figure out during the game is, okay, after g4, let's say, I don't know, I can wait. After h4, I have to go h6, or should, at least. Now, of course, g5 is just losing because of f takes g5. Of course not this, because of h5, and then this pawn is queening. But of course, I can just take like this. Okay, let's say this, for example, or maybe b4. I wait. And one thing I had to figure out, that whenever he plays g5, I can take like this, of course not like this because of h5. And okay, if he takes it, then I can probably just play g4 and then h5 maybe. So, and if he takes his pawn and takes this one, I have the important move f6 check, and now I get a second protected passed pawn, because let's say allow some f6, it's not really that what I wanted, so of course this is a draw now. He didn't accept the rook, so exchange but the rook trade, but instead he didn't play rook h3, which looks very logical, just picking up his pawn. For some reason he played rook e3, maybe was worried about some e4 ideas, but doesn't really work out that well. For example, if we go here, you can just go back. Or let's say wait, then push e4. It's just very slow. For example, white can just stop this pawn. So rook e3 would have been way better. Played a5, very useful move, trying to stop any piece going to b4, because this exchange is always good for me. If in Rook Endgames, if you are on the defending side, you usually want to exchange pawns. So white doesn't really want to go play b4. Instead he played rook h3 now, but of course now I have just a better version. And I play rook d4, and activities were important in rook endgames. I wanted to go after this pawn, but rook d1 would have been way stronger. And after rook takes h7, now I can give this check. The king can't go to b4, very important. Let's say, I don't know, king b2, now rook f1, and there are a lot of threats, and my rook is just so active that I shouldn't have any troubles to hold the draw. But unfortunately played rook d4, and after rook takes h7, I played rook g4. So my idea was after rook f4 he goes rook h5, which is still okay for me because my rook is more active than this one. But my idea was now I hit this pawn, and after g4 I go rook g5, which is also okay because now there's no rook h5 anymore. In the game he played rook h8 to try to get this pawn. I took this one. I could play this. This endgame would also be quite difficult to hold, but I guess I can go after this pawn and somehow it should be draw. Maybe c5 takes b4 maybe. Okay, rook f1, and apparently it's a draw. He played c5 in the game, maybe preparing to play king c4 and then to go rook a8 because I can't do that much. Played rook f2 trying to get this pawn, but maybe played rook a8 and I took this pawn. And here was where I made quite a mistake in practical view. I played king e6, which looks logical at first, but the thing is the king is not really placed better on e6 than on e7, as we will see. Of course, this can be prevented. And if I give this check, then the king just enters, and I can't allow this. For example, king d5, just c6, or e4. Maybe also, okay, the rook check, and it's losing for white, for black somehow. I should have played rook f1, which also looked quite logical, just getting from behind, and now I can push this pawn. And basically my rook is better placed and my king is not worse as in the game. So played rook king e6, king c4, and now played e4. Rook f1 would have been maybe a bit better, but it's quite difficult here already. So played e4, and now he played king d4, which looks quite logical. And he made a blunder apparently, but it's not an easy move to, but it's an understanding decision. It's not very easy to find the best move here. So the best move is rook f4, and the reason is because the rook is more active on f4, which doesn't look like as it is the case, but the rook on e5 only supports this pawn and it can't, stop these pawns or attack them. The rook on f4 is quite useful. For example, if he plays b4, then I have this check, and it's just an immediate draw. This is just an easy draw to hold. And if also this pawn is protected, because in the game he played rook a6 check, and now here in this case I can play king d7 because this pawn is protected. So let's have a look at this position. This pawn is hanging actually, so that's also plus of having the rook on f4. And yeah, this is a draw. It's still quite complicated, and I'm not sure if I would have been able to hold this, but anyway, okay. He gave his check, b4 is also possible, and now went to f5, and here he played c6, which is a blunder. Now after c6, I have only one move to come back, and I didn't find it. So in the game I played pawn to e3, and after c7 I have to stop this pawn, and king d5, stopping any king e6 tricks, and after e2 it's just rook a1 on this. There, white just queens and is winning, and otherwise this other pawn is coming, or maybe even the king. So there was a chance for me to play king e6, which is findable, I would say, because after I just stop c7, no, this one. Now even if he takes his pawn, I can defend this one, and I get the c7 pawn, and also can push e3 at some moment. And yeah, otherwise I'm just getting the king to d6, and this should be a draw. In the game I played e3, but now it's just losing. I had to prevent this, and now a nice move. Just, I don't know, it is protected, but just activating the king and shouldering this king. And after e2, which I didn't play in the game, he can play rook e1. And then again it just pushes his pawn. And I try king g4. I mean, king f4 is the same basically. In the game it's also the same, I guess. And now even play king h3, I had only made this move with 4 seconds on the clock, and after rook e4 I just resigned, because this comes with a check. I mean, I saw this, but then I just forgot it. Anyway, it's just lost, because after king f3 can, for example, do this, and it's just completely losing for me. So I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something, and see you in the next one.